Here's a ground ball right side, could do it. The Houston Astros are world champions for the first time in franchise history.
What would you like to tell your fans back in Houston watching right now?
That we did this for them. You know, I know it's been a lot of going on in Houston since last year, but this is because of them. They are the biggest reason why we're here playing every day.
I don't think you can put it into words what it means to the people of Houston. Man, this is, we wore that patch and we wore it proudly. And the people of Houston were never far from our minds. We know they're at Minute Maid watching. You know, they were going crazy for us. I mean, we saw the flat, on TV that they're taking to Minute Maid, and they deserve this as much as we do, man. And we're gonna party hard.
Here come the Astros with winning on their mind. Here come the Astros, number one every time.
The Astros haven't been number one every time, but this time they are number
champs,
one.
Astros!
Oh my God, RG. I don't have much of a voice right now. I think I screamed. There was a bunch of just, yeah, and I can't even do it anymore several times after it was over with.
Have you run out in the streets yet? Have you been out and streaking up and down, right? Because it's the biggest moment in your life there. It's like, man, it's just like as far as sporting moments, next to the Rockets championships, I don't know what. I mean, this is just crazy right now.
Altuve and McCullers said it. I mean, I can't tell you, RG, you know, you root for your teams all the time, and it's you root for your teams, but you want to win, you know, because you feel like, hey, it's my city and whatever. But I wanted them to win so much, and we've talked about this on the show. I wanted them to win because I like these guys. I loved getting to know these guys. They are great people. You knew the work that they were putting in. You knew how hard they worked, and you knew what kind of people they were. And, you know, I'm so happy for them, and I'm happy for the city more than anything. Everything that the city has gone through, I can't even talk.
Wow, that's pretty amazing that it's left you speechless there. You've lost your voice from an Astros championship. This is everything that we've all waited for our whole lives. I mean, it's been 56th season of the Houston Astros and all the disappointments. And then finally, you know, 2017. And Sports Illustrated in 2014, Ben Ryder wrote an article. He put George Springer on the cover. He said, Astros world champs. And that's actually what came to fruition. 2017, the plan worked. What Jim Crane and Jeff Luhnow set out to do, hiring Bo Porter first, of course, and having to go through those tough 100-loss seasons. And then A.J. Hinch comes in, and the young players who they had drafted start to finally come up and play. And this is what happens. It produces a championship. And I don't know, like with you, it goes back to all the times. I mean, we all have our family members, some of whom have passed away, friends who have passed away, all these people who have cheered for the Astros over the years, starting from the 1960s for some people, when the franchise was born in 1962 as a Colt 45s, then all the way through the 70s, the first NL West championship in 1980, where we talked about it with Joe Niekro, finally getting that, putting the Astros in, then losing to the Phillies, who would eventually become champions, then 1986 with a heartbreak there against the Mets, and then the Biggio and Bagwell years, kind of the cornerstone of the franchise. I mean, those were great years throughout the 90s, and then finally the Astros in 2004, 2005, with Carlos Beltran coming over. They're able to do it. They can get to the NLCS with Carlos Beltran, and then he and Jeff Kent walk after that season, and everybody thinks the Astros aren't going to do anything. They get to the World Series, finally get swept by the Chicago White Sox, and then all of a sudden, you know, you go through all these years, and it was until 2015 that the Astros returned to the playoffs. I mean, and then, you know, they get to the playoffs, they have that lead against Kansas City. Kansas City goes on and wins a championship. And the Astros 2 years later stick to the plan. And this is what we've also said too. I mean, if we're ever going to win a championship, this isn't like the Rockets in 94, 95 when, hey, Michael Jordan was out and, you know, that these championships, oh yeah, well the Rockets won only because Michael Jordan's Bulls weren't in there. No, the Astros beat the Yankees, the Red Sox first, the New York Yankees and the Los Angeles Dodgers, a 104-win team, a great series, a great team, the Dodgers. The Astros truly deserve to be world champs. I mean, this is something we'll live with our whole lives. Go out, party right now, Houston. And like you said, for the community, for the devastation that everybody went through with Harvey, people are still suffering out there. They're still having their homes that they're having to repair after all the flooding. And yeah, I'm like you. I must say I've had a drink or two here this evening because it's just been just kind of this great celebratory moment, and I got into it when the Astros were popping open champagne too, so I said got to join in the fun there. But this is absolutely one of the greatest nights as far as being a Houston sports fan, winning a title in baseball. This is something we will remember for all our lives, and a great team.
And I couldn't help, RG, I don't know about you, I couldn't help but think about, we've interviewed Tal Smith. He's still around. He's getting older. Somewhere I know he was watching this on television or wherever he was, and he got a chance to see the Astros finally win after all the years that he spent working for this organization, trying to win a championship. Bob Aspromani, who we've talked to, original Astro. You talk about Biggio and Bagwell. We know about those guys, but Jimmy Wynn, the toy cannon, his health is not good. I've seen him in the last year, and he's still around though. He's still around, and you got to know that this has got to be so special for those guys. It's got to be special for those guys. RG, Larry Dierker. Think about Larry Dierker right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about a lot of things, but I'm also thinking right now, Astros are the first team in Texas to win a World Series. And Nolan Ryan, remember all the times he got close with the Rangers, but I just like being the first team. The Astros started off in 1962 with, again, the Colt 45s, changed over the Astros when they moved in the Astrodome. But hey, Astros own Texas, first team ever to win a World Series. They'll never be able to say, the Rangers will never be able to say that we took Texas first. No, the Astros did. World champs. And winning pennants in both leagues, the NL, the AL. This is just a special time. World Series. And the thing about it, too, is like you said with Larry Dierker, that's a guy. There's a lot of franchise lifers. I think of like Roy Hoffines, right, starting off this whole, Judge Hoffines starting off this, and Bob Smith and all the others who brought baseball to Houston. And then kind of through kind of the lean times, just all the different incarnations of the Astros franchise. And again, like for a lot of us, we grew up during the Nolan Ryan years and Mike Scott and the great pitching staffs and Cheo Cruz, and then goes to the Biggio and Bagwell era. And that's when, again, a new legion of fans kind of developed, and seeing Biggio and Bagwell and Berkman and all those great teams. I mean, now we're really seeing this. And I noticed that Alex Rodriguez even talked about it on this show with Fox. He said that this is a new core four with the Astros, and it really is when you see guys like Jose Altuve, George Springer, Alex Bregman, and Carlos Correa. You're just seeing these guys that are. Did I say that correctly? I mean, I'm going over. I'm like in delirium right now. George Springer, Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve, and Carlos Correa, a new core four. These are building blocks. These are guys that have already won a championship. It's really exciting. We don't know what the future portends. We don't know what's going to happen there, but we know that the Astros at least will always have this championship. We'll always remember this, like we remember 94, 95 with the Rockets. This is a title finally for Houston. It feels great.
Carlos Correa, how about him? He proposes, RG. He proposes right after he wins the championship. I mean, boy, you talk about special moments. I mean, it just kept getting better and better as you watch the post game, and you heard earlier Altuve and Lance McCullers and those guys. But we can't even continue, RG, without talking about a guy that's really special to both of us. We've interviewed him several times on this show. I felt like the moment that this Astros new era started, you could say it was Altuve, you could say it was Dallas Keuchel, but the moment as a fan that you felt like things are starting to change, we're starting to see the guys that we want to see. I remember George Springer gets called up, and I said, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to the ballpark that night. So I was there. I was sitting out in right field in the bleachers. I'm like, I'm going to go see this guy, George Springer, that everybody's talking about. I'm hoping this guy is going to be one of the saviors of the franchise. And just as somebody that you see, he didn't come on like gangbusters. He wasn't the Carlos Correa coming quite like that out of the bat. But, he slowly got better and better and better before your eyes. And all of a sudden, he's a MVP candidate halfway through the season before he gets hurt. And then, of all things, he's the guy that wins the World Series MVP, wins the new Willie Mays named award of the MVP. And RG, the thing that he said was that when I grew up and I was hitting baseballs and I would pretend and I would, try to pretend to be Willie Mays, that was my guy. He said I would pretend to be Willie Mays when I was a kid. And so for him to win that award for everything that comes his way, this guy so much deserves it. I can't even express enough. He's just a special guy. And I'm just so happy for him. We saw him, his stuttering got better with everything else that he does. His stuttering slowly got better, and he never, ever let that be a hindrance to him. And he embraced the challenge of it. And I knew he would embrace this challenge in the World Series because that is who George Springer is. Yeah, most definitely. George Springer, like you said, grew up in Connecticut. He grew up actually a Boston Red Sox fan, but his mother was a gymnast and his father was also an athlete. So it always had all the tools, very athletic player. The Astros drafted him, and you have to give some credit to the old regime too. Let's not forget, even though we, Ed Wade and Bobby Heck, we sometimes joke around about them, but, some kudos go to them because, they're the ones that signed Altuve under the Ed Wade administration. And Springer. Of course, Jeff Luhnow went ahead and drafted Carlos Correa and, Lance McCullers and some of the Alex Bregmans, of course. But, you can't forget what the previous administration did. And then, George Springer just in this whole playoffs. Remember, he had the terrible ALCS and was struggling. And then in the World Series in the game 2, he gets that key home run and was able to help catapult the Astros to victory after the Dodgers had tied that. And again, he wins the World Series MVP, and that just shows you to be a champion. I always remember the Rudy Tomjanovich line, don't ever underestimate the heart of a champion. Well, now the Astros have that, and they had it throughout this playoffs and this World Series, whether it was a Game 7 against the Yankees, Game 6 and Game 7, backs against the wall, whether it was when they were down 3-1 in Game 2, looking like they're going back to Houston 2-0, and having to come back with a Springer home run. I mean, and Springer he sets a tone. He is the leadoff hitter, and a lot of people said drop him in the order. And, like you said, he ends up in Game 7. First of all, he gets that double to start off the game, right, against Yu Darvish. So immediately Yu Darvish is having to pitch out of the stretch. He's having to think about runners on base. And, in that first inning, that would ultimately prove all the runs that the Astros would need. Alex Bregman hits the ball, and then there's the error. Well, the thing about it, RG, is you look at how they scored the first 3 runs, and for all the talk about how, the Astros are, they hit for power, they've got this great offense or whatever, they did it in this game with, just moving guys along. Bregman causes the error, but that's because he was smartly trying to hit between first and second and moving a runner over to from second and third. Altuve gets the ball in play and gets that run to score. Even Lance McCullers. Look at Lance McCullers at bat. That was huge. Him able to just get the ball in play as a pitcher. We've seen so many pitchers that just couldn't get the ball in play. And what are we going to remember about Josh Reddick this postseason? I guess in his Captain America underwear, celebrating in the postgame locker room, because basically his at bats in Game 6 and 7, and he was finally pulled for Cameron Maybin. Great guy, great teammate. Had the key hit against Boston in that Game 4, finally clinching. But other than that, he was a pretty big zero on a disappointing World Series. But hey, I don't want to criticize any of these guys tonight because it's a great win. And like you said, Lance McCullers, Josh Reddick had a terrific regular season. He deserves as much as anybody. And I also wanted to ask you too, what did you think of finally a couple of guys? First of all, Carlos Beltran, we've spoken about him before. He played with the Astros in 2004. Remember, he hit all those home runs in the postseason. They came up short in the NLCS. That was the Biggio, Bagwell, Berkman era. And so he kind of is a link to those two eras. He finally comes back to the Astros.
and basically was a pinch hitter in the World Series. Wasn't starting even at DH anymore.
Coach
But
Beltran.
finally,
He was Coach Beltran in the World Series. But
I mean, I wanted to ask about him and then also Brian McCann, because that's another guy. These are two veterans, came over from the Yankees, and he was a guy that, is kind of towards the end of his career. Again, another bridge that I remember in the 2005 playoffs with Brian McCann hitting a home run. All of that. He was a young player then, and he was a dangerous bat in the lineup as a young player. And he's come over to the Astros. These are two guys that, who are veterans, and you just love seeing those guys finally getting a win.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, Beltran, for just what his career is, I mean, this guy's going to be a Hall of Famer, and this sort of puts the icing on the cake for him. I wouldn't be surprised if this was his last game ever, and what a way to go out. I mean, yeah, you didn't see him do much for the Astros in the postseason on the field. You didn't see it, but you knew what he did behind the scenes, and they talked about it all year long. These guys talked about what he meant, and Brian McCann, he did it at the plate. I mean, he did it in the field. He was doing everything for the Astros, and I mean, it's just you can't win.
He made as many trips out to the mound as Schroeder would to Charlie Brown.
Yeah, you just can't say enough about what these guys did and throughout the series. And also, I mean, there's one guy that I got to talk about. How can you not talk about this guy? Who would have thought when the Astros made their offseason moves? We talked about McCann, we talked about Beltran and Reddick, and all those guys were the main part of the conversation. But the guy that we barely mentioned, or he was mentioned, but he wasn't a major part. We were like, well, I don't know if that's a big move or not. Charlie Morton was as cool as a cucumber. His stuff was absolutely wicked in the championship series, in the World Series. I mean, I'm watching him out on the mound. My heart's jumping through my chest. I can't sit down. I'm pacing. I'm walking around. And Charlie Morton looked like he was playing catch in the park with his 5-year-old. Like this was just another day at the park. It's just unbelievable what Charlie Morton did. And I mean, he was the guy that if there's a MVP of the World Series as a pitcher, it's Charlie Morton. I mean, it's Charlie Morton is the best pitcher on the Astros team in this World Series. That's amazing.
Well, he did a terrific job. I mean, I still think Justin Verlander with his 2 starts there too. I mean, that one, he kept him in the game and then losing the previous night. And what Brad Peacock did, it was a team effort. But Charlie Morton, what he did in Game 7, first of all, against the Yankees in the ALCS to help the Astros win a pennant, and Lance McCullers came in and relieved. This time it was the other way around. Lance McCullers started, and it was Charlie Morton going the distance. And there were times in there I was wondering, are the Astros going to pinch hit for him? What's A.J. Hinch going to do? They got Keuchel in the bullpen, they have Verlander in the bullpen. I could see Verlander coming in for the last 3 outs and, capping off his World Series career. And just Charlie Morton, look at the way that guy pitches. I mean, he just has he has a 97, 98 mile per hour fastball. That's exactly what you want coming out of the bullpen. 3 days rest. He had pitched well, like you said earlier series. He has that curve. He has his breaking pitches, but when he wants to throw that high heat, and the Dodgers have a problem with that. That's the one kind of Achilles heel. They're looking to lift the ball. If you can get that 97, 98 mile per hour fastball in the upper part of the zone, that, they can go down. And then you mix it with breaking pitches where they're having to look at all parts of the plate, and not knowing where things are going to come. That was definitely, like you said, he was in rhythm, and he came in. Remember, he gives up the run, so you're not even sure if he's going to survive that inning. He ends up getting the key strikeouts there. And, again, you have to commend Charlie Morton.
I mean, who would have believed with Charlie Morton that you would have had Keuchel and Verlander in the bullpen, and I'm sure every Astro fan at home is going, No. Leave Charlie Morton out there. Game 7 of the World Series. We want him. He's the guy.
Well, I kind of like watching this whole World Series tonight. Before the game, everybody was like probably felt the same thing too. It was the Dodgers are going to win this game. They're at home. They won the Game 6 with Verlander starting. It's kind of seeming to be the Dodgers. Tommy Lasorda said, I don't give a blank what you did last night. It's all about Game 7 to Dave Roberts before the game. And he said that after the Game 6 win by the Dodgers. And so a lot of people were already kind of a fait accompli. A lot of people probably in Houston were already resigned to, the Astros had a great season, go 7 games. And I just was reminded, I saw the Star Wars trailer for The Last Jedi, and there And Luke Skywalker says that key moment, this is not going to go the way you think. And I really like from the minute the Astros started off there and then they get the 5-0 lead, I did not think the Astros would have a 5-0 lead. Their offense finally awakened in the first inning. That's what they did most of the season long, but they haven't been doing it on the road in the postseason. Lance McCullers, magician. Really, those first 3 innings, how many times with how many base runners in scoring position, the Astros were able to shut down the Dodgers. Then like Brad Peacock comes in. In this much maligned bullpen, it's like what I told you, you were talking about, well, who do you go to and all of that. Even Francisco Liriano and Chris Davinsky coming in for a batter or two, they turned out to be key. Brad Peacock, we can't forget what he was able to do. He came in and kept things going. And Clayton Kershaw really pitched well for the Dodgers. He gave them 4 strong innings. He came in there and kept the Astros at bay. And so, that's why, Charlie Morton coming in and closing it down. This bullpen, they were pretty much tremendous to allow only 1 run to this prolific Dodgers offense at home in a World Series Game 7. It's just a capper. And hey, we were talking about this too. At least it was a little bit easier having a 4 to 5 run lead. I don't think any of our hearts could have taken another 1 run, or the game had been tied and go to extra innings, or the Astros cough up a lead and have to come back. Hey, now we can go back and watch Game 5 again. The big win, that game where the Astros finally come back and win it 13-12, and that's like turns the series. And, hey, that's what everybody will remember, that game, and then finally winning a Game 7. But now all those other victories mean something because the Astros were able to win this Game 7. And I'm glad they made it a little bit easier on Houston Hearts to not where the tying run was coming up and Dodger Stadium was rocking in the 9th inning.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you talk about guys that struggling. You mentioned earlier Reddick. Altuve, he just hit 194 in this series from the last numbers that I'm looking at. So,
but he carried the team, and how Altuve throughout the playoffs, and then he also had the key hits in games 2 and games 5. He was a much different hitter at home. Yeah, he struggled these last 2 games, but Altuve has just been so great. You just can't. You can't say enough about it.
But that's what I'm saying. You can't, say, well, but look at what, Reddick really didn't do anything.
Well, I didn't mean, I'm sorry that I kind of said that. It's a night to celebrate. Let's not go over the negative or anything like that.
But the point I'm making with what you say is that this, that's why this is a team game.
Exactly.
And life, you got to learn that. Sometimes you need somebody's help. Sometimes you need somebody to pick you up. And then sometimes you got to pick somebody else up. It's one of the things I love about sports is what you see with the Astros. They all knew that everybody got them there. Look, a lot of the guys in the bullpen, most of them sucked throughout the playoffs. It was a bad playoffs for most of the bullpen, including Ken Giles. But, those guys throughout the year, you get to the point where you got home field advantage so you could win that Yankee series, and you got home field advantage against the Red Sox. And you were in position to do the things that you were doing because of what Chris Davinsky did the first half of the season, and what Will Harris did the first half of the season, and what Ken Giles did for most of the season. So you look at what everybody puts into this, and it's so many guys having to come together and do this. That's why they always talk about that. They always mention the other guys. And in life, it's a lesson for us all, the way this Astro team showed us, this is how you do things. This is how you come together. This is how you do not give up no matter what happens. You just do not give up. And when they say earn history, there's no question. I never knew what that was going to mean until you watch what the Astros had to go through to win this World Series, Game 2 and Game 5. I don't even feel like it was as much the players earning history. I felt like the fans earned their history too, because it was like your heart. It was just, it's up in your chest and beating like crazy, and you're pacing back and forth, and you're perspiring and through all of these games. But the Game 2 and Game 5, it just put everybody through an entire ringer. And because of what happened in Game 2 and Game 5, you're watching Game 7, and even when it's 5-1 and Charlie Morton's rolling along, I don't know about you, but I'm still thinking, I saw what happened in Game 2. I saw what happened in Game 5. Anything can happen in this series. Let's just get to this final out already.
Of course. I mean, it's 27 outs. Look, the Dodgers are a great team. I don't know if you saw Dave Roberts out of the game. Very classy. Complimented the Astros on being an excellent team. And also, he's a friend of A.J. Hinch. Complimented A.J. Hinch and how he managed the team. So, and the Dodgers, they were a great team. The Astros, I mean, you could play a best 5 out of 9 and, however you want to do it, best 6 out of 11, whatever. And these games would all be close and tight. The Dodgers, are a full, complete, deep team. I mean, the Astros just edged them out. We're a little bit better. We're world champs. That's why I really feel like this was a championship earned by Houston. This was a team that was born in Houston in 1962. The franchise has been through so many ups and downs. And I mean, even just 2 years ago, the Astros had a 4-1 lead against Kansas City, and Carlos Correa bobbles up ball and everything. And I really felt tonight, like watching the game, like remember last night as we're recording this, of course, we're recording it post game. So on the Tuesday night, game 6, the Astros, it seemed like every hard hit ball, it was to a Dodger. If there were any breaks, it was going to the Dodgers. That's just how baseball is. But for whatever reason, in Game 7, the Dodgers hit some really hard shots, and the Astros were just fielding it perfectly, or they were in the right place at the right time, or Bregman makes a sensational play to throw out a runner. I mean, just those type of things that you when you're going to win a championship, you got to have the ball bounce kind of the right way. And if it does, take care of it. Don't. Once I saw the Dodgers too in the first inning having that throwing error, having things that they uncharacteristically, they usually don't do. They don't make errors. They don't do those things. And so when you're able to capitalize on them, and then the Dodgers have runners in scoring position. Remember, the Astros put all the traffic on the bases in Game 6, and they weren't able to drive anybody in. Well, the Dodgers, that was happening to them in Game 7. And when the Astros were up there, they were getting the runs in. And that's just baseball. It's those little things. Like you said, it's a team sport. Guys pick each other up if somebody's not doing well. And it was just really nice to see. I mean, 2 great teams going at it. This is, I don't know, where do you rank this now as far as best World Series you've ever seen in your life? I mean, taking out the Houston angle from it, taking out how partial we are, this is always going to be our greatest. But, what do you feel like as far as just from a historical perspective watching baseball?
The games with the Mets and the Red Sox, to me, in '86, that series, and I think so much of that also was the lead up to it. And obviously the Red Sox dealing with the curse and all the characters that you had from the New York Mets and everything. And then, like I said, the lead up, the ALCS and the NLCS that year, probably the 2 best league championship series combination in the history of baseball. I don't even know if there's much of an argument about that. I mean, I think somebody like Bob Costas would tell you that. But as far as this World Series would go,
well, remember, I want to interrupt you there for a second. What about? I agree with you. '86 was great, but remember 2004, because the Red Sox came back from 3-0, and then the Astros and the Cardinals. People forget about that. All those great games with Beltran, and went to 7 games, and the Astros had a 3-2 lead in that series. So Astros were probably involved in 2 of the greatest, like when you were talking about, NLCS, ALCS, in tandem.
Who are in that conversation for the greatest World Series of all time? Give me some World Series.
Well, people always talk about, of course, the Mazeroski home run. I don't think anything's ever going to top that, because it was against the Yankees at their peak, their dynasty, and Mazeroski hits basically the game-winning home run there for Pittsburgh, and so that's like one of the great all-time wins. And then you have, of course, a lot of people talk about the World Series with the Diamondbacks finally breaking through and getting to Mariano Rivera with Luis Gonzalez, just because they had classic Game 7s, and some talk about different World Series. I mean, if you like, people talk about the Braves and Twins World Series because of the pitching matchup between John Smoltz and Jack Morris in that 1-0 victory.
Here's where I think the Astros series has some stuff, but it doesn't have the deciding Game 7 that some of the series have.
It's more like, I would say, like the Rangers and Cardinals series, because remember that Game 6 they were down to an out. The Cardinals and David Freese, gets them tied, and then go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, but here's where I'm going to tell you why the Astros series fits into it. I think the quality of the 2 teams that are playing to me, it was top notch with the type of talent that you had going in this series. And you had two teams with 100 wins, and you don't see that often in the World Series. It's very unusual. And so the quality between these two teams and the number of players that I think we're going to be talking about for years and years to come, from Altuve to Correa to Springer to Cody Bellinger. Maybe Justin Turner can keep this up. But
Corey Seager.
Yeah, Corey Seager. There's so many guys. Obviously, you talk about Justin Verlander and Clayton Kershaw. We're talking about two of the greatest pitchers of all time. So, I mean, that is why I think this series, has got a lot going for it. But that's something, Archie, to me, that's something we need to talk with some of our historians, like our friend Greg Lucas or Bill Brown. Let's bring them in, because I don't feel like I'm always the best judge of that type of stuff. And I certainly.
What do you think too, about finally Justin Verlander? I mean, we really haven't talked about it. Hey, we haven't had a Kate Upton mention yet, but she was down there celebrating. But I wanted to ask you just about Justin Verlander, that trade. I mean, we've discussed it before, but for people who might be listening for the first time to us now after the Astros win the World Series, just what Justin Verlander coming to the team has meant and throughout the postseason. And for him, remember, he was on the 2006 Detroit Tiger team that lost to the St. Louis Cardinals. He was on the team and what was it, 2013 or 2012 that lost, to the Giants. So, I mean, he's been on a couple of World Series losers. And, finally to get over here at the very last second, 2 seconds before the deadline, come to the Astros right after Hurricane Harvey, and then just almost be unbeatable. His first loss as an Astro was in the World Series Game 6, and then in Game 7, the team comes back, what you were talking about before, resilient, comes back, picks him up, wins Game 7. He gets his first World Series ring title. I mean, it cements his place in the Hall of Fame.
Right. I mean, I don't know if there's anything I can add to the Justin Verlander thing. You mentioned the seconds. They talk about baseball being a game of inches. In this case, it was a game of seconds, because those 2 seconds or whatever saved the Astros season and made them World Series champions without question. But I want to talk about some storylines that people might not know as much about. But A.J. Hinch, he was a guy that became a manager, one of the youngest managers in baseball. And, he said he was too young for it. And this is somebody, RG, we had a chance to be around A.J. Hinch. And A.J. Hinch is one of the most genuine guys that you'll ever run across as far as a manager or a head coach in sports. He's so easy to get along with, and you just understand.
Well, isn't Bill O'Brien when you cover the Texans?
Well, that would be my point right there. I mean, he's the opposite of somebody like Bill O'Brien. That just, to me, a Bill O'Brien, I don't know, maybe the Texans feel like he's an inspiration, or maybe that's what they're going to tell you. But no, this is the type of guy that inspires you, just like Rudy T, just like, Bum Phillips, but in a different way. Instead of, Bum was kind of he's the country guy with the sayings and all that sort of stuff. AJ's the Stanford guy, the smarter guy that, he fits in with a little bit of the nerd culture, but there's a coolness about AJ Hinch. He's a guy that you could go up and talk to at the bar and have a great conversation with. He's so sharp. But what you see, and remember when you talked with George Springer, and he talked about in the interview that you did with George Springer, he talked about that he's the type of guy you want to play for, because, the one thing George Springer mentioned in that interview that you did with him was that AJ, you knew that he knew what you were going through. He had been a player before. He understood it. And it hadn't been that long since AJ Hinch had been a player. And it had been it's been such a short time ago that Carlos Beltran, he said, was the best teammate that he ever had. I mean, he was teammates with Carlos Beltran. I mean, which one is older, RG? I forget. Is it Beltran or AJ Hinch?
No, AJ Hinch is older, but yeah.
It's Carlos not by Beltran. Much. It's not by much, is it?
Yeah, a few years, but yeah, not that much. They're both kind of early 40s there, but yeah, definitely AJ Hinch is the new type of manager. Both he and Dave Roberts are the kind that, and you're seeing this throughout baseball. By the way, Alex Cora is going to be managing the Boston Red Sox, he's the bench coach for the Astros. The Astros are going to need a new bench coach next year. I guess that could be Carlos Beltran, right?
Right.
If he decides to retire. Yeah, AJ Hinch is that new type of manager that every organization wants because he communicates well with the players, but he's also very much into the analytics, which you have to work well with the front office. Because remember, the reason why Jeff Luhnow said that he got rid of Bo Porter, there was just kind of an impasse in the communication. You want to be on the same page as your manager. You want to be able to move forward and go with the progressive thinking and as far as managing baseball games, the latest data and analytics. And AJ Hinch embraces all of that. He's had front office experience. He's a former player, so he communicates well that way. He's pretty much, they're the old school managers like Tommy Lasorda, back in the day, or Jim Leyland, and Tony La Russa kind of was your lawyer turned former ball player becoming manager. And now it seems like the AJ Hinch and Dave Roberts, these are the prototype guys to manage. And the Astros are really fortunate because they're kind of again, credit Jeff Luhnow for discovering AJ Hinch because he didn't have success in his first stop in Arizona. A lot of the players, he's kind of learning how to manage. Is kind of the same thing as Terry Francona when he, was first hired by the Phillies and, was fired and then gets, hired by the Red Sox and leads them to their first championship, in 86 years. And so with Astros, with AJ Hinch, he had failure. And I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people to learn that, sometimes things don't work out the first time around. It maybe is a good omen for Brad Ausmus, who had a job with the Tigers and lost it, and he'll be much better in his second managing job. I mean, sometimes you just need to go through that experience, have the failure. It makes you stronger. AJ Hinch went to the Padres after that. He was able to work in the front office. That's how he got to know Dave Roberts. Both of these guys worked in the Padres organization. They were able to see baseball from a different angle, from a different perspective. They still were smart. They still were former players, but it's all helped in how they manage a ball club. And again, like you said, he's able to wear so many different hats. You really have to do that in today's baseball.
We mentioned Justin Verlander earlier. The Detroit Tigers on Twitter said, for someone who has earned several honors over his career, we know this one is special. Congrats at Justin Verlander. So there you go. That I know. Look, RG, here's what I know from my friends around the country. I've had Cardinals friends congratulate me on this one, and they're happy for the Astros. I've had Cubs fans congratulate me, and they're happy for the Astros fans, and they're happy for the city of Houston. People around the country, they were rooting for us, and it's nice to know that you have some friends out there that want the Astros to win, and it's so cool. We were rivals with the Cardinals and the Cubs for a while, but I think the respect that this team has drawn from around the country is magical. James Harden, also on Twitter, Stros, congrats on earning your way into history.
How about J.J. Watt with every pitch, too?
Yeah, James Harden saying, Stros, congrats on earning your way into history. Much respect. Congrats, Astros. Houston strong. That's from James Harden up in New York with the Rockets right now. Cameron Maben on Twitter, we battled, we persevered, we never gave up. We did it for the most deserving fans in the world. We're Houston strong and World Series champs. It's still trying to sink in. Wade Phillips, son of bum, you know him on Twitter. You know him, longtime Houston sports fans. He said, "Congrats, Houston strong." The congrats are coming in from all over the place. Deshaun Watson. World Series 2000, actually, Deshaun Watson doesn't have his new tweet up, but I'm sure he'll have one up soon as I'm looking through Twitter. I'm just kind of doing this off the seat of my pants. So, yeah, it's really amazing. And, Brian T. Smith said, Reed Ryan, that's another guy, one of our first interviews, RG, on the show. He said, as the tears flowed, and this is quoting Reed Ryan, this is for 80, for 86, for 98, for 05, for everybody that's ever worn this uniform. That's Reed Ryan, a friend of the show. We've had him on a couple of times. Great guy. We know about his dad, but this is, Reed Ryan's one of the class guys, a guy who was around the clubhouse back in 86, as a kid when Nolan was pitching at the time. and he was there, watching Biggio during his first year and playing with Craig Biggio around that time. So it's it all kind of connects with the Astros, which is really cool, and not every organization is like this.
Hey, people kind of forget, too, Nolan Ryan, when he first got into the big leagues, he was on those Miracle Mets, the 1969 Miracle Mets that beat the Baltimore Orioles in the World Series. So Nolan Ryan wins a World Series. He's out of the bullpen during that time. I mean, he's a young, hard-throwing flamethrower. I mean, he would always be that, but he wasn't a starter. He wasn't the great, legendary Nolan Ryan. This is his first World Series championship since then, with the Houston Astros as a special advisor to the club, and his son involved with the organization. Remember, he came up short in 1980 when a few outs from the World Series he had the lead, and you think, okay, the Astros are going to the World Series against the Phillies. Phillies come back, win in extra innings. They go on 86. I mean, much detailed there, and the Mets in that 16 game extraordinaire in Game 6 with Mike Scott looming, and Nolan Ryan, of course, goes to the Texas Rangers, and then retires and goes with the Texas Rangers and becomes an owner. And in 2011, that Lance Berkman World Series with the Cardinals, with David Freese heroics and Albert Pujols 3-home run game and all of that. You had Nolan Ryan, of course, as an owner for the Rangers, thinking he's going to win a World Series then, and then the following year thinks he's going to win it again, and the Giants get the Rangers. And again, that's why I think it's so special. The Houston Astros, I mean, we've discussed this, they talk about, the Rangers, because they were the Washington Senators and, they haven't run since 1961. No, this is Houston. This was the 56th year. They had this long drought, long suffering. It's, I know it's a football town, but baseball's always been up there too. The Astros are a beloved franchise. And that's why it's really so special to have all these people who've been part of the organization from its past now, Jim Crane, got to give credit to him and his ownership and being able to go out this past off season, bring in the veterans to go with the young core. And really, it's brought a championship. There's so many people to share it with, the Biggios and the Bagwells, and like you said, the Ryans and the Billy Dorans, or the Glenn Davis, or the Joe Sambitos, the back to the Doug Rooster Radar, or whomever you want, Jimmy Wynn, whomever you want to. I mean, all these great Astros have ever worn their uniform. It's just, that's why it's so special.
Yeah, and you talk about Nolan Ryan, just to put it into perspective. In 1969, when he won with the Miracle Mets, he was 22 years old. Nolan Ryan is 70 right now. So that is how long it's been for Nolan Ryan between those two world championships. And that kind of puts it into a little bit of perspective. And yeah, we talk about it's a football town, like you said, with the Texans and the Oilers and stuff like that. But let's be honest. Hey, it's the Houston Astros. They were the first major sports team to come to Houston. They broke the barrier. They put Houston on the map because of the Astrodome, because you mentioned him earlier in the show, because of the guy behind it all, the Astros original guy, the one that built the Astrodome. Who am I talking about, RG? Roy Hoffines. I mean, Judge Roy Hoffines.
I was thinking Chester Charge too, but maybe.
I mean, there's just so many things about the Astros that connect Houston sports throughout the years, and what they were able to almost get done, and all the tragedies that they've gone through. We can't forget about guys like Darryl Kyle and Ken Caminetti and Dickie Thon and on and on and on. I mean,
Don Wilson too, a great pitcher. I mean, before our time really, but I mean, he died and his numbers retired. Yeah,
the great Don Wilson and what happened to J.R. Richard and the stroke and everything like that. Right. So, this is if you're a young Houston fan and you happen to be listening to this, I mean, I hope you guys really appreciate what just happened. I mean, it's just we can't even tell you, as somebody that some people that have been around long enough to see a lot of this stuff.
Well, I was just thinking about, the first championship Houston had with a major professional sports team. That's why the Rockets were always so beloved, with Akeem Olajuwon and that team in 94, 95 and the back-to-back championships. But, you heard this too. People would say, well, Michael Jordan was kind of semi-retired then. He was playing baseball and he wasn't there. The Bulls were, there and healthy, that they would have been able to make the run for the championships, and the Rockets wouldn't have won during those years. So even then, like, Houston kind of had it's almost had a chip on the shoulder, because those were great Rockets teams. The Rockets got by those, Bulls teams, even in the Jordan era. It's not a given that, Michael Jordan versus the Rockets, that would have been an automatic win. And even when he did come back in 95, they lost to Orlando, and the Rockets ended up being Orlando with the Clyde Drexler, those championships. So those are the only really, I know the Houston Dynamo, people will talk about that with MLS, or they'll talk about the Oilers with the AFL, but we're talking about major, the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball, the three major, because Houston doesn't have an NHL team. And, the Astros, here, doing this again, I mean, that's just why this run's so historic. There's nobody that can say this championship wasn't earned. They were a 100+ win team. They started out from opening day, got that big early lead, won the AL West. They didn't come in as a wild card. That 101 win team. They're really a complete team too. I mean, I know at the beginning of the season, it was Dallas Keuchel and Lance McCullers. They had Justin Verlander, becomes kind of their big three. But even Charlie Morton, like we were talking about, I mean, just undersung hero, part of that rotation throughout the season.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you still sound like you've got the chip on your shoulder and you're trying to sell it. We're world champions. We're world champions. You don't have to try to sell me or anybody that's listening right now.
Nobody can take this away from Houston as far as what happened with baseball here. This was historic. Beat the three great franchises, landmark franchises, a classic World Series against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Houston Astros are triumphant. Dodgers a great team. There's nobody that can poke holes in this and say that, well, this team was probably a better one. Like, even the Indians, they'll say, oh, well, the Indians won 22. No, the Astros went through the playoffs. They beat everybody. They, met the challenge, and they got by all the teams that, were there in front of them, who were great, who had legendary traditions. And, I mean, the Yankees and the Dodgers, both tough opponents. I mean, even the Red Sox, I mean, that was a team everybody picked for a World Series at the beginning of the season. So, I mean, it was very well earned, this championship. It was great. And they gave us some legendary games, too. Now we can breathe easy. Anybody that's recorded these games or wants to watch them again, now that we know the outcome finally, that it's an Astros World Series championship, go out and buy your pennant, your gear, go out and get your T-shirts, honk your horns, enjoy this, Houston, enjoy a championship. It's awesome. Astros World Series champ.
All right. Yeah. All right. I'm going to close it out by just reminding everybody, if you've been going through the post-game stuff and you think, oh, that's over with. No, we're going to try to get some of the guys that we've had on the show over the years, and the Allison Footers and the Greg Lucases, the Bill Browns, Jake Kaplan, et cetera, et cetera. We want to get some other perspectives and, some of the people that we know this means so much to, both because they covered this team and they've been around this team. Brian McTaggart, he's a guy I know we're going to try to get. We're talking about somebody that's rooted for the Astros since he was a kid. He's around our age, so he's been through the same war that we have. So stay with us for all of that stuff. But, hey, let me say it one more time, because it's worth saying one more time. The Houston Astros, your Houston Astros are world champions. Tell it to us again, Joe Buck.
Here's a ground ball right side, could do it. The Houston Astros are world champions for the first time in franchise history.